Okay, welcome to the Mustalk podcast. This is your host, Conor O'Boyle, and I am speaking with my first guest, Grant Booth. Welcome, Grant. How are you doing?
Doing good, Connor. Thanks for having me. It's a lovely day in Dublin. Cold, wet, and rainy. But it's great to be here. Thank you so much.
It's great to have you. So, Grant, I just want you to talk a little bit about where you're from and what you do.
Okay, cool. Well, my name is Grant Booth. I'm from South Africa. I was born in Cape Town, and I'm a music composer for film, television, video games, basically any media. I've done a BA in music, in a music course, and sound design and film and all that sort of thing. Let's see what else. I've done quite a few projects. I've scored my own feature film. I've done additional music for some feature films. I've done commercials, promotional videos. Geez, you name it. I've tried my hand at it. I've also worked for a Los Angeles-based music library. Now I am trying to further myself, and I'm studying my master's in Dublin. That's what's brought me here. Loving it so far. I love the vibe here. Enjoying the music scene, enjoying the student scene again. It's been about 3-4 years since I was a student, so so it's great to be back. And otherwise, yeah, I guess that's me.
Okay, great. So, for the people listening, and I imagine not a lot of listeners would be familiar with the South African music scene. So, can you describe a little bit your experience of the sense of music in South Africa in relation to the sense of music in the UK or in Dublin?
Well, I'd say music in South Africa is quite a not a divided, but like a very varied market. There are certain cliques. So in terms of commercial music, we've got a style called Kwaito music, which a lot of our demographic listen to a huge amount, and it kind of started in South Africa and moved up towards the north of Africa, that sort of thing. Obviously, a lot of people know us for our South African jazz, Hugh Masekela, that sort of thing. And obviously, that's traveled around the world, and it's very well known, and it's still going. It's a massive thing. We've got lots of jazz bars in South Africa where you can go listen to lovely South African jazz, and new masters are coming out every single day, which are great to listen to. On the other hand, we have a thriving sort of rock market, I would say. A couple of years ago, there were a lot of metal bands and stuff. Now it seems the more rock sensibility, more hip hop, genres are starting to cross over these days, which I think is cool. And in terms of the film music industry, I would say that it's been growing year on year. We're a developing country, and I would say, if I think back maybe about like 8 years or so, we had maybe like 10 feature films come out, maybe even less than that, and not doing very well on the international market, but the sort of emphasis was there to improve what we were doing and to write more stories, because South Africa is lush with so many narratives and things that we could pick up on. The world obviously thinks back to apartheid and Nelson Mandela, and we've had those films come out and be put to the big screen in Hollywood and all that sort of thing. But we're a thriving nation of stories from all backgrounds. I mean, we're such a melting pot. If you think about, there's a large Indian community, there's a large black community, and in the black community there are, I couldn't name them all of the different sort of languages and all that sort of thing. Then there's the white community, obviously, Chinese. I mean, everyone's there if you think about it that sort of way. And what that leads to is a really thriving sort of market. We've got, I would say the biggest sort of film market in South Africa is definitely the Afrikaans market. I just think they've been doing it for a lot longer. We've got a guy called Leon Schuster in South Africa who made great comedy movies that did really well in our box office and actually overseas as well. And that kind of paves the way forward for Afrikaans sort of media to go out. And those are all of the films that I worked on. And what we're seeing now, due to, I mean, geez, we only achieved our independence, 20 years ago, something like that. We're only starting to kind of see it now that this, the black perspective is coming to the fore, and we're seeing more films made by them from their backgrounds and their experiences, which is great. I just finished working on a film called The Hangman, which is set in apartheid, but doesn't focus on it, which I think is great. It focuses on a young black family. I don't want to give too much away, but it takes it from a different perspective, and it is directed by Zwelethu Radebe, and he's got such a fresh sort of look at the world, growing up in the New South Africa, a born free, as some people like to call us, and yeah, I guess at the crux of it, we're just growing year on year, and I'm excited to be a part of that. As much as I'm moving to Dublin to further my craft and stuff, South Africa's never going to leave who I am, and I'm never going to leave the community there, because I enjoy the stories and I enjoy working with the people there and their ambition and their drive to overcome adversity. And yeah, I've kind of spoken on this topic for quite a while now. Sorry.
Yeah, that's great. So now that you have moved to Dublin, a lot of the things that you were saying there, for example, the narratives of the stories been told and the films been made in South Africa for the past decade or so have been very much reactionary to the events of the 90s, of the Mandela period. When I've seen some of those movies, the Steve Biko stuff and the Bang Bang Club and things like that. I've seen those movies. So it's really great to see that new stories have been told now, and they're not just recycling the same stuff just for different generations with better cameras. And I think parallels can be drawn between the post-apartheid films made in South Africa and the post-Troubles films been made in Northern Ireland. For example, In the Name of the Father and Bloody Sunday, these type of films, although they represent a later part of the chronology as opposed to some of the films made in the Republic of Ireland do. For example, Michael Collins and The Wind That Shakes the Barley, they represent the early part of the 20th century, whereas the Northern Ireland films depict the latter half of the 20th century. The time frame is very similar to the South African time frame, almost spanning the entire 20th century. And it's great that these films now have their place in time retrospectively to be reflected upon and depict events that otherwise may not have ever been heard about. But it's great also that new films have been made and new ideas have been presented from the youth and across communities, that they're coming together now to make great art. For example, Game of Thrones is very popular. It's also made in Northern Ireland, Star Wars, and some of the stuff that's been made here in Dublin is also fantastic. Love Hate is a personal favorite. It's a spectacular TV show to watch, and it gives Dublin a place on the map, on par with the Baltimore and The Wire and all these critically acclaimed shows, So it's great that these things have been made. Absolutely fantastic. So what's your general impression of Dublin? And I know you've been up to the north as well. So what's your general opinion on that and the music that you've experienced so far?
I like that you drew parallels between Ireland's struggles and South Africa's struggles, because it's one of the first things that I happened to kind of notice when I got here, is that in South Africa, as much as we went through an incredibly difficult and horrible event with apartheid, the art that kind of came out of that was very happy and enlightening and beautiful. If you look at 20th century music coming out of World War II and all that sort of thing, of course I mean, it's not exactly the same, but the music that and art that appeared out of that, kind of reflected it in a little bit more of a literal way. I would say in Ireland and South Africa, it kind of took the opposite step. All the music I've heard here so far, I mean, I could be missing a lot of it, but it has this sense of joy and the sense of freedom, and there's just an underlying happiness to all the music I've heard, which draws parallels again to South Africa's music, which I think is amazing. In terms of the country, though, I mean, I've been here for about 3 months now, 3.5 months or whatever, and it's tough for me to have a fully formed opinion. I mean, it's one of these countries, like any country in the world, I guess. You really have to spend time in it and really absorb it, and get into the heart of it and speak to people and visit the lands. And as much as I've been around the country now, and I've been up north and to the western side, I've been to Dingle and all that sort of thing, you've got to live in it every single day for, I don't know, maybe a couple of years before you really get a sense of what it's all about. But from what I've experienced so far, is Dublin is a lovely city, extremely vibrant and multicultural, and the music scene here is incredible. I think the greatest thing is that you hear music on the streets. Like there's not a day that you can walk out in Dublin anywhere and not hear some music being played that's local, that's homegrown in a way, which is lovely. And that's something I hope that South Africa can achieve. Unfortunately, there is a lot of crime in our country. We've appeared on polls for that sort of thing, which is unfortunate. And it's not as easy to go walk around in the streets and to hear the musicians and stuff like that, and that's something that we sorely lack. You have to kind of go out of your way to find it, whereas here the beauty is it's everywhere around you. And I've heard so much music and kind of digested so much of it because it's around you every single day, and it's lovely. It's such an incredible experience. With Northern Ireland, obviously there's a bit of a divide. I mean, there's a more English presence there and that sort of thing, but nevertheless there is so much Irish music and heritage, and it's just great. It's just great. I could babble about it forever.
You can see how the Irish music has influenced lots of Hollywood film scores. Some of the most revered scores have been taken from Irish folk tunes or Irish instrumentation and whatnot. So let's actually get down now and talk about the music that you've written, or some artistic practice and how you like to work, and aspects of composition that you find is important. Your general practice, or your routines, or how is it that you go about composing music?
Well, I'd have to say that for any composer, it's hard to kind of narrow that down because it's always constantly changing. The processes that you go through on one project might not be the same for another, depending on what is called for. But there are some things that stay constant. So I would say, from a more technical aspect, before I go there, I come from a background of, kind of a hodgepodge in a way. I've learned a bit of rock, I've learned a bit of jazz, a bit of this, a bit of that. I studied orchestration and composition for a bit, and I'm kind of one of these people that I'll take as much as I need of something, and then start doing my sort of take on it and stuff, which I think is cool. And in the beginning I was worried about it because I thought, oh my gosh, I need to like focus on something, otherwise I'm never going to make it. But at some point a light bulb clicked, and I thought, no, what I'm doing is fine. I've got to stay true to the way that I'm doing things, and just try and hone that sort of art of being a jack of all trades, because in the film composition world, that is kind of what you need to be. Exactly. It becomes a bit of a luxury down the line, I guess, as you either get more success and stuff, you can maybe specify in something. But I think the difference between a normal music composer and a film composer is our need to kind of want to do everything. For me, the process always starts with the story. I've always been an advocate for story above everything else. Forget plot, forget all the images and all that sort of thing. Just what is the crux of the story? So often I will sit down with the director, and hopefully it begins soon before long before the film actually takes place, and the edit is brought to me, and we'll discuss story and what that's all about, and characters, and what's going on there. I'll basically take that away and go right between 10 and 20 minutes of music, and just go wherever my mind takes me on that sort of journey. Then later I'll take that back to the director, and he or she will kind of we'll go through it together, and from that decide if there's anything that we like. And even if there's only like 5 seconds of music out of that 20 minutes that resonates, it's still I would consider like a win. You're coming away with at least some sort of thematic idea or harmony idea or whatever. In terms of the really technical stuff, I work on Logic Pro 99% of the time, and I try to...
For the listeners, can you describe what Logic Pro is, just for those that don't actually know what Logic Pro might be?
From the very basics, you get what we call a DAW, a digital audio workstation, which is basically on your computer a program that can arrange and record audio, whatever audio that may be, such as guitar or voice like we're recording now, and on top of that you get little things we call VSTs, or sample libraries, which are basically little instruments, or virtual instruments if we want to call them that. Somebody has gone and sampled a violin, for example, and you get to use those samples, those little audio recordings that are now mapped out onto a keyboard, which you would plug into your DAW. And from there, you can manipulate a violin or any other instrument that's, basically all of them have been sampled in some way. So basically, from that, we'll create what we call a mock-up, which is basically a demo version of a real piece, and as film composers or musicians or whoever's doing it, the aim is to try and get it to sound as realistic as possible. And a lot of what you would hear nowadays, especially with trailers and stuff, is all actually digital at the end of the day, maybe with some small recordings done of guitars or voices in the backgrounds. But we've gotten to that point where we can almost fool you completely into thinking that it's a live orchestra, or it's live instruments or live drums that are going on there. And the only reason why we do that, and we call them mock-ups and demos, is because the aim is to take that to a director or to an advertising company or whoever's requesting this track, and get funding towards doing it for real and doing it live, so that's the very basics of the process, I would say. Not many of us get the opportunity to actually go and record these orchestras or live ensembles, so you get very good at at convincing people with your sample libraries and your audio mock-ups, basically.
Can you talk us through your sample libraries and the things that you use, the things that you don't use, and what you find is better than others, and what you would look forward to getting in the future?
So I think it's a great question, first of all, but I'd like to start, if there's anyone that's wanting to get into this game and stuff, because now that you mentioned that, I was literally having a conversation with somebody yesterday about what sample libraries to get and where to start and all that sort of thing. And I basically started by getting something, and I suggest this to everyone else, is that you get something that encompasses synths, orchestral sounds, pianos, something that just does the basics of everything. As much as when you buy Logic, there are Logic sounds and stuff that come with it. There is a need to obviously go out and get third-party applications, because they're just recorded better and they do the jobs better. So I would go for something like, like an East-West sample library, such as there's like a Platinum bundle out now that gives you access to orchestral stuff, like strings and brass and all that sort of thing. And there's some synths that are available, choirs, and, it's everything you need to kind of get started. And from there, you can start building up. And for me, I would say the string library I use most is definitely LA Scoring Strings. It's a lot of money. It's a lot of money to spend, but really you get the bang for your buck. It's got every articulation that you would ever need. I mean, obviously there's always more that you could do in terms of extended techniques, but for your bread and butter, I would say LA Scoring Strings does that for me. Other than that, the next thing I use primarily all the time is Omnisphere 2. It's just got everything, man. Jeez, all the synths you could ever want, psychoacoustic sounds, little sound designing effects, pads, cheesy stuff if you need that, hip hop stuff, EDM if you want, it's got everything from that sort of aspect. And then just to run off a couple of others that I use a lot of the Spitfire stuff, Albion. I just got the Olafur Arnold's Composer Toolkit, which is great. It's fantastic, like felt piano and some synths in there. I use a lot of 8DO stuff as well. I just recently got their 1901 piano, which is amazing, absolutely fantastic, well recorded piano, beautiful sound. And then a lot of Spitfire stuff from my percussions as well. I get a lot of that from the percussion library that they've got, Percussion Redux, I think it's called. And then let's see what else. Jeez, everything and anything I can. I've gone through a lot of Sonic Kinetic stuff as well, Sound Iron. You can check out Embertone. They've always got great instruments, really cheap as well. For the quality that you get from Embertone, it's ridiculous. Like the Shire Whistle and the Friedlander violin. I mean, really, for that Friedlander violin, I would happily pay a good €300, and it's a lot cheaper than that for what you get. And it's a gorgeous sound that anyone can use and anyone can buy. It's really reasonably priced. And I remember asking my mentor in the beginning of this process, like, what sample library should I get? And he said, all of them. And I think that's the name of the game, because each one has something unique that can bring life to your audio recordings and your mock-ups and stuff. So yeah.
Okay, so in composing for the Hangman, the last project you worked on, can you describe some of the ups and downs of that process? Was there any pieces that were like perfect on the spot, and when there were the pieces that were rejected, and how did you deal with that? Did you take the material and rework it, or did you completely start from scratch with a new piece? Or how do you deal with those temperamental directors?
So I must say that Zweli, or Zweletu Radebe, the director of the Hangman, is definitely one of the few directors out there that truly values every member of his team and takes the time to, go through the process with them and get what he wants and get what they want at the same time. So when it came to music, we've been discussing it for about 2 years already, almost. The atmosphere, the emotion, it was never a question of let's compose in the key of A or anything like that. Nothing musical, but just emotive terms, which I think is the best way to kind of get the ball rolling. Because a composer will take that and interpret it in their own way. And I guess the the ambition is to surprise your director in a good way, you know, and to give them something that they weren't expecting, which is cool. For the Hangman, I would say that the process began with that. I think I did about 13 minutes of music, just atmospheres and different sounds, and I took a lot of audio recordings of birds that, you know, for me, a bird and its sounds represent freedom and all that sort of thing. And I tried to just go completely in the weirdest places I possibly could, and just, you know, just go to extremes, really, you know. And from that 13 minutes of music, of some of it sounds like complete hogwash, but that's not the point, you know. I sat in front of Zweli and we listened through to it, and there were like 2 moments that he enjoyed, and for me that was a win, as I said before. And I took those parts and developed them. Then eventually I got the edit for the film, and that's kind of when the ball really gets rolling, you know, and the work really starts, because finally there's something to piece your music together with. There's a sense of rhythm. A lot of composers will write stuff before and hand that in and say, you know, that's it. But there's something about watching a film, for me, that tells me so much information, you know, that gives me so much, like in terms of pacing and timing and overall atmosphere. Like, as much as somebody can explain a scene to you and stuff, when you see it fully realized with an edit and scenes that came before and scenes that come after, everything suddenly has context, you know. So I took that, and I wrote all the pieces for the film in a kind of traditional way, I guess, you know. That's kind of what was coming out of me at that point in time. And you know, there were violins, and there was orchestra, and then there were some weird subtle tones underneath that I created using the birds thing from before, and train sounds and stuff like that. But it's kind of a bit of a hodgepodge, to be completely honest, now looking back at it. But what I find is always great is presenting a director with too much rather than too little music. And we discussed this as well. You know, I gave him, and there was a lot of music, and there was a lot of layers going on, and lots of thematic material in terms of melodies and all that sort of thing. And he watched it, and I got that sort of, you know, okay, Grads, it's good. But, you know, it's, you know, every composer gets freaked out and worries so much about that moment. But it really is a lovely moment, because it gives you so much clarity on what is actually necessary and what is needed. You know, I think as composers, we tend to get maybe sometimes overly ambitious or overexcited when there's a project, and we're enjoying what we're doing and stuff, and the music kind of reflects that as well. And Zweli and I sat down, and he was kind of saying, you know, there's a bit too much here, like, you know, why don't we strip that away? So we sat with the open project, and we were like, oh, let's take out these instruments. Okay, yeah, that's doing something. Boom, we'll take these instruments out. No, that was fine. Let's put that back in. And, you know, picking and choosing and going through it. And eventually we got to the place that we started off with, which was those bird sounds, those weird ambiences and those weird noises, and almost completely took out the orchestra that I'd done. And I had just done layers and, you know, basically layers underneath the orchestra in order to fill up the section. But, you know, I needed Zweli's kind of ear to pull away everything and to see that was where the magic was kind of happening, you know. And both of us got really excited when, you know, we started peeling back the layers and we found these little gems of moments and stuff was happening there, you know, without having to overstate itself. So that was great. It was a wonderful moment. You know, I haven't had too many of those because, you know, directors tend to have so many other concerns and so many other worries, you know, with cameras and editing and boom, all that other stuff. So it was a lovely moment, and, you know, it taught me a lot about just about the process. You know, we rather deliver too much and pull back stuff and deliver too little and not have like enough there, or that sort of thing. Also, just the essence of what music can do with like a couple of tones and a couple of chords and a bit of movement, And then I would say from there, funny enough, that was actually happening around the time when I was moving to Ireland. And I guess a lot of that journey and stuff was getting reflected in the music as well. And when I came here, there were so many new sounds and things I was hearing, and like, I kind of stepped away from the movie for like a week or two to kind of just, move in and stuff. And then when I came back to watching it, I was seeing and hearing new things, which is cool. And I went out into Dublin onto the trains, and I was recording new sounds out there and mangling them in different ways. And yeah, I guess that's the only way that you really get over the film and humps and all these bumps in the road and all that sort of thing. It's just communicating with your director, taking a step back from it sometimes, and not letting it worry you too much. I find for myself, and if it happens to me, then surely it happens to someone else, is that as soon as you start worrying about something, that's when your worst kind of work comes out. When you sit back, relax, and take for what it is, and do what comes from your heart, I think that's the only time that real kind of good music is made, if there is such a thing.
Oh, that's great. And just one final last question, and I'm going to ask all of the guests who come on the show the same question. For you, I know this question probably changes throughout your life as you grow older and as you have new experiences. But for you, who has been the consistent, composer that you've admired and whose music has been fairly influential on your life to date? Who would you say has been the one that you would always return to, time after time?
So that's probably the toughest question you could ever ask a composer, because we love everyone and we love all these different scores and all that sort of thing. But James Newton Howard is probably the one for me. As much as I've moved away from him and I've listened to Zimmer and I've listened to John Williams, or I've listened to Trent Reznor, or a bunch of other composers, Johannes Hansen, all that sort of thing, I find I keep coming back to certain pieces of his, certain scores. My favorite score probably ever is the Signs soundtrack. I love the consistency of it and the theme and variations that goes on. He's got that bum 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 bum, and it appears in every single track in some manner, some way, or some form. But it never gets boring, which is something I love about it. But also just his attention to theme. Sometimes his use of synthesis and electronic effects is so subtle but so effective, and I'd say he's probably been the most consistent. I keep going back to the Science soundtrack. I keep going back to the Village soundtrack. The oh goodness, what's that film called? The Atlanta soundtrack that he did. I find that is pretty consistent. Yeah, and I'll probably keep going back to it and keep learning more from it every time I do. Yeah. Which is probably the best part about listening to other composers and other music, is it's always so rich and there's always something new to learn. Doesn't matter who you're listening to. Yeah.
Perfect. And finally, where can people find you online? Is there like Twitter feeds or websites or whatnot? Can you give your details out?
So I guess it's as good a time as many, but I've just launched my website, which is grantboothmusic.com. And on there you will find links to my Instagram, my Facebook feed, SoundCloud, and on the first page there's a whole bunch of music and there's a biography of me and all that sort of thing. So grantboothmusic.com, and that's that.
Yeah, Grant, thanks for coming on the podcast. It was great to talk to you. I'm sure we'll have loads to talk about next time.